I can still hear the scream. It wasn't human. It was like an animal being slaughtered. Steam rose as I held the empty pot, my arms trembling. The shower was still running, mixing cold water with the boiling water I had just poured. The droplets on the shower walls seemed to bleed as he writhed on the bathroom floor. I felt nothing, no satisfaction, no horror, just peace. For the first time in 17 years, silence in my head, like a storm had finally passed. What nobody understood is that pot carried more than water. My name is Gabriel. I'm 20 now. I recently left the Juvenile Rehabilitation Center, where I stayed after the incident, as the psychologists called it. The newspapers were less subtle. Son tortures father. Brutal family revenge. Teen destroys father's life. Headlines that only told the end of the story, never the beginning. I'm sitting in this empty park, because it's the only place where I can think clearly. The concrete benches, the trees swaying in the breeze. Nobody around to judge me, just me and my memories. Memories that still haunt me, even after all this time. You've probably heard about what I did. It's the type of story that spreads quickly, that people share with that low, almost excited tone of horror. Did you hear about the boy who poured boiling water on his own father? They love telling that part, but nobody tells what came before. Nobody talks about the years that led to that moment with the pot in my hand. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I'm not proud of what I did either. I'm here because maybe, just maybe, someone needs to understand that sometimes the monsters aren't the ones who appear in the newspapers. Sometimes the real monsters are those who should protect us. I guess you're wondering why you should believe me. Why spend your time listening to the version of someone who committed something so brutal? I just ask that you suspend judgment until the end. Then you decide if I'm just a psychopath or if there was something more in that house that nobody could see from the outside. If you're really paying attention to me, I need you to give me real proof. Like this video right now. Subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and comment where you're watching this story from. It seems simple, but it shows me who really cares about what I have to say, who's really willing to listen beyond the headlines. If you did that, thank you. It means more than you imagine. If not, well, maybe you're like everyone else who just wants the shock without caring about the truth. What I'm going to tell now, I've never told anyone. Not to the psychologist at the center, not to the judge, not to the few friends who still talk to me. These are things I kept inside because I was ashamed, because I was afraid no one would believe me. But I'm tired of carrying this alone. And maybe, hearing my complete story, you'll understand that sometimes the line between victim and aggressor is thinner than we'd like to admit. I was born in a red brick house with a small backyard where my mother Rachel planted sunflowers. My father, Robert, worked as a manager in a hardware store. My younger sister, Camila, was born when I was 4. From the outside, we were the perfect family for Christmas photos. Robert, Rachel, Gabriel, and Camilla, white smiles and matching clothes. The early years were normal, even good. I have memories of park outings, Sunday ice cream, my father teaching me to ride a bike. He had patience back then, smiled when I fell and said, "Get up, son. Men don't cry." There were signs even then that I was too young to recognize. Everything started to change when I was about 8. The store where my father worked closed, and he was unemployed for 6 months. That's when I began to know another Robert, one who drank beer from morning on, one who yelled at my mom for anything. Food too cold, house too messy, bills too high. It's your fault, Rachel. If you knew how to manage money better, we wouldn't be in this situation. My mom, always so strong, began to wither like her sunflowers during winter. She stopped singing while cooking. Stopped smiling when we came back from school. Her eyes were always red, and she wore makeup even at home. I only understood years later that it was to hide the bruises. When my dad finally got a new job with a construction company, we thought things would go back to normal. But those 6 months had changed something fundamental in him. The anger had taken root and now grew like a weed, suffocating anything good that still existed. He started picking on me first. Small things at the beginning. "You're holding the fork wrong, Gabriel. You look like an animal. This report card is pathetic. My son can't be that stupid." Lower your voice with me, kid, or I'll break your teeth. I was 9 when I got the first slap across the face. It was for spilling a glass of soda on the living room rug. The sound of his hand against my cheek silenced the entire house. My mom froze in the kitchen. Camilla, only 5 years old, started crying, and my father simply continued watching television as if nothing had happened. That night, my mother came to my room and hugged me tight. "Daddy's very stressed, Gabriel. We have to understand and not make him nervous." That's when the pact of silence began that would define our family for the next years. School could have been a refuge, but I was a quiet kid who didn't make friends easily. When Ms. Julia asked about a bruise on my arm, I made up a story about falling off my bike. She looked into my eyes for a long time, as if she knew I was lying, but she didn't push. Part of me wished she had. As I grew, Robert's violence also grew. By 11, I learned to recognize the signs, the way he turned the key in the lock, the sound of his footsteps on the stairs, the smell of whiskey that emanated from him. On good days, he just ignored our existence. On bad days, anything could trigger his fury. I remember one night when I was 12, I was doing math homework at the kitchen table while my mom prepared dinner. My father arrived already drunk and saw my books spread out. "What mess is this on my table?" he growled. "Sorry, Dad, I'm almost done," I answered, trying quickly to organize my notebooks. "I don't care," he said, and with a sweep of his arm threw all my books on the floor. "Clean this shit up now." As I bent down to collect my things, I felt his foot on my back pushing me against the floor. This is how you learn to be responsible. My mom came running. "Robert, please, he was just studying." That's when he turned to her. The sound of the slap echoed in the kitchen. Camilla started crying in her room, and I just stayed there on the floor, paralyzed, hating myself for not having the courage to defend my mom. At 13, I tried to seek help. I talked to the school counselor, Mrs. Martha. I told her about the shouting, about how my father hit my mom, about how I was afraid to go home. She listened with a concerned expression and said she would take action. A week later, I was called to her office. My father was there, smiling, arm around my shoulder. "There was a misunderstanding," he explained in his manager voice, the one he used with customers. "Gabriel has a very fertile imagination. We're going through a tough time at home with financial problems, and I think he felt a need for attention." Mrs. Martha looked from me to him, undecided. "Mr. Robert, you know we have an obligation to investigate any allegation of abuse." Of course," my father replied, squeezing my shoulder hard enough to leave marks. "And I appreciate your concern, but I think my son needs to learn the difference between discipline and abuse, don't you, Gabriel?" What could I do? Deny it in front of him, then get home afterwards? I nodded, defeated. "See?" My father smiled. "A misunderstanding. I promise we'll work on our family communication." That night, when we got home, he dragged me to the basement. It was the first time he used the belt. "To teach you not to lie about your father," he said between blows. After that episode, I realized there was no external help. Nobody would believe me against the word of a respected adult in the community. Robert was charming in public. He donated to charity, helped neighbors with repairs, always smiling at parent-teacher conferences. Who would suspect that those same hands that shook the pastors on Sundays were the ones that left marks on his son's back? My mom sank into a silent depression. She started taking medication that made her dizzy, distant. I guess it was her way of escaping. I caught her crying several times, but when I asked what was wrong, she'd just smile sadly and say, "Nothing, boy. Mommy's just tired." Camilla, my sister, developed an incredible ability to become invisible. She learned to move silently through the house, to eat quickly and disappear to her room, to never ask for anything. At just 9 years old, she already knew that drawing attention was dangerous in our house. And I transformed into another person. The smiling Gabriel who played in the backyard died slowly. In his place grew someone full of anger, fear, shame. I stopped trying to make friends. My grades dropped. I began having constant nightmares where I was drowning and nobody reached out to save me. It was around this time, when I was 14, that I discovered Robert's dirty secret. I was looking for tape in his office when I found a locked box at the back of the cabinet. Curiosity was stronger than fear. I used a paperclip to open the simple lock. Inside were photos, dozens of them, men and women in explicit positions. Some seemed to have been taken without consent. There were also motel receipts and printed messages from dating sites. My father, the man who preached about the sacred family on Sundays, led a double life. I put everything back as I found it, but that discovery changed something in me. It wasn't just the hypocrisy that disgusted me, but realizing that while we lived in terror, he was having fun. While he controlled every aspect of our lives, demanding perfection, he broke his own rules in secret. The house became more suffocating each day, the shouting louder, the blows more frequent. And the worst, he started looking at Camilla in a way that made me sick. The same looks he would give me before teaching me to be a man were now directed at my little sister. One night, when I was almost 15, I heard my mom pleading in their room. "With Gabriel, it's already horrible, Robert, but not Camilla, please, not with her." That's when I understood that my mom always knew, and never really protected me. The anger I felt towards Robert began to splash onto her too, and so I isolated myself more and more, building walls around me. The only person I still cared about was Camilla. I started putting myself between her and our father whenever possible. I absorbed his anger so she wouldn't have to. When she did something wrong, I took the blame. "Was it you who broke this plate, Gabriel?" Robert asked once, while the pieces were still on the floor and Camilla's hands trembled. "Yes, Dad, sorry, I'll clean it all up." The price was high. More bruises, more humiliation, but it was worth it to see the relief in her eyes. At least someone in that house was being protected. When I turned 16, Robert started a new phase of torture. Physical blows weren't enough anymore. He wanted to break my mind too. He started waking me in the middle of the night for man-to-man talks. He'd sit on the edge of my bed, sometimes drunk, sometimes frighteningly sober. "You'll never be anything in life, Gabriel. You know that, don't you?" I pretended to be asleep, but he continued. "Look at you, weak, pathetic, can't even defend your own mother." Other times there were questions about my sexuality, too detailed to repeat here. Questions no father should ask a son. Questions that made me want to tear off my skin, such was the shame I felt. At school, I was a ghost. I walked through the corridors unnoticed, my arms always covered even in the heat to hide the marks. A physical education teacher, Mr. Morris, noticed something once when my shirt rose during an exercise. "Are those broken ribs, Gabriel?" "Fell down the stairs," I responded automatically. "3 times in the same place?" he asked incredulously. I looked away and he sighed. "My office is always open if you want to talk." I never went. After the experience with the counselor, I'd learned my lesson. At home, the situation with Camilla was getting worse. Robert started insisting she sit on his lap during dinners. He began entering the bathroom when she was showering, claiming he needed to get something urgently. My mom, in her haze of antidepressants, seemed not to notice or pretended not to. One night, I woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. I looked at the clock. 2:37 a.m. The footsteps stopped at Camilla's door. Without thinking twice, I got out of bed and opened my door. Robert was there, hand on the doorknob to her room. "Dad," I called, loud enough to wake my sister. "What are you doing?" He turned, surprised, then irritated. "Go back to bed, Gabriel. It's none of your business." "I thought I heard Camilla crying," I lied. "I was going to check if she was okay." "I'll check," he said through clenched teeth. "I'm her father." "I'm already here," I insisted, walking to stand between him and the door. "You can go back to sleep, Dad." His eyes shone with a fury I knew well. He grabbed me by the neck and pushed me against the wall. "Are you challenging me, boy?" I didn't answer. I just kept my eyes on his, even as his hand tightened around my throat. It was the first time I didn't look away. Something had changed inside me. After what seemed like an eternity, he let me go. "We'll talk about this tomorrow," he muttered, going back to his room. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the floor, leaning against Camilla's door. The next morning, he acted as if nothing had happened. But I knew something had changed. An invisible line had been crossed. A few days later, Robert lost his job at the construction company. Something about money disappearing. We never knew the details. He came home that day reeking of alcohol and with an expression that froze my stomach. "All of you!" he shouted as he entered, knocking over a small coffee table. "Sucking my money, ruining my life. Parasites!" My mom tried to calm him down. "Robert, the children." The blow caught her in the face so hard she fell. Camilla screamed. I ran to put myself between them. "Get out of the way, Gabriel," he ordered. "No." The hit came fast, catching me in the stomach. I fell to my knees, breathless. He kicked me in the ribs once, twice. I heard something crack. The pain was so intense I saw black spots in my vision. Even so, when he turned to Camilla, I crawled to grab his ankle. "Not her," I managed to say between spasms of pain. He bent down, grabbed my hair, and slammed my head against the floor. "You never learn, do you?" That's when my mom finally reacted. I don't know where she got the courage, maybe from the desperation of seeing her son being beaten. She picked up a lamp and hit Robert. It wasn't strong enough to seriously hurt him, but it distracted him. "Run!" she shouted to me and Camilla. "Run!" Robert turned to her, momentarily forgetting about us. I grabbed Camilla's hand, and we ran out the front door, barefoot, without coats, despite the cold. We ran to Mrs. Irene's house, an elderly neighbor who always gave us candy when we were younger. She opened the door, saw my state, bleeding, barely able to stand, and Camilla crying, and pulled us inside without asking questions. "Call the police," I asked before passing out on her couch. I woke up in the hospital. 2 broken ribs, mild concussion, bruises all over my body. A social worker told me my mom was also hospitalized with head trauma. Robert had been detained, but posted bail and was at home under a restraining order. "I want to press charges," I said immediately. The social worker, Helen, looked at me sadly. "Your mother refuses to testify against him. She says she fell down the stairs." "And you believe that?" I asked incredulously. "Of course not. But without her testimony..." "I'll testify. Camilla can too." Helen held my hand. "Gabriel, you're a minor, your sister too. Without a responsible adult supporting you, his word against yours." I closed my eyes, trying not to cry from frustration. The system was failing us again. I spent 3 days in the hospital. On the 3rd day, my mom came to see me. She looked like she'd aged 10 years. One side of her face was still swollen and purple. "We're going back home, Gabriel," she said softly. "Your father promised to change." I looked at her like she was a stranger. "He'll kill us one day, Mom." She looked away, tears streaming down. "He's the provider. What will we do without him?" Anything would be better." "You don't understand how the world works," she sighed. "Sometimes we need to endure difficult things for the family." At that moment, I understood she would never really protect us. Fear had transformed her into an accomplice. And I, at 16, was alone in this battle to protect Camilla and myself. When we returned home, Robert was different. Too calm, too smiley. It was like living with a ticking time bomb that smiled as time passed. "Family," he announced at the first dinner after our return. "We're starting over, everything new, everything clean." My mom smiled nervously. Camilla kept her eyes on her plate. I couldn't even look at him. For a few weeks, he really controlled himself. There was no shouting, no hitting. He even started looking for a job. But I watched him. I saw how his eyes followed Camilla through the house, how he clenched his fists when he thought no one was watching. The anger was still there, just waiting. It was during this period that I began to plan our escape. I saved every penny I could, hiding it in a shoebox at the bottom of my closet. I researched shelters for victims of domestic violence. I even contacted a distant aunt who lived in another state, hinting that we might need help. But Robert found out. He discovered my money stash and the notes about shelters. He was waiting for me when I got back from school. Planning to run away? He asked calmly, swinging my shoebox. After everything I've done for you? Dad, I just... Shut up. He roared, throwing the box against the wall, coins and bills scattered across the floor. Ungrateful piece of shit. You think you can take my family from me? He advanced, grabbing me by the t-shirt. Where's your mother? Grocery store, I stammered, with Camila. A strange smile appeared on his face. Good, so we have time for our pending conversation. What happened in the next 2 hours is difficult to describe. He used the belt, used his fists, used words that cut deeper than any blade. But he went beyond physical violence. He wanted to humiliate me, reduce me to nothing. He forced me to kneel and beg forgiveness. He forced me to swear I would never try to leave the house again. He made me repeat between sobs, I am weak. I am ungrateful. I deserve this. When he finally stopped, I was on the basement floor, bleeding from my nose and mouth, barely able to breathe. He crouched beside me. If you ever try to take Camila or your mother away from me, he whispered, I'll make you beg for death before granting it. Understand? I nodded weakly. Now clean up this mess before they get home and remember, this is our secret. He went up the stairs, leaving me in the darkness. Something broke inside me that afternoon. It wasn't any bone. It was something deeper. My hope, my belief that we could escape. In the days that followed, I could barely walk. I made up a story about falling off a bike to explain the visible bruises. My mom looked into my eyes, and I saw that she knew the truth, but said nothing. Camila noticed too. She started bringing me food in my room when Robert wasn't looking. Small gestures of care that were her way of saying she understood. One night when we were alone in the kitchen, Camila whispered, Why don't we leave, Gabe? It's not that simple, little one, I replied, trying to sound strong for her. I'm afraid of him, she admitted, eyes full of tears. He comes to my room sometimes just to talk, he says, but he looks at me in a strange way. My blood froze. Has he touched you? She shook her head. No. You always appear before anything happens. It's like you know. I hugged her tightly. I will always protect you, Camila. Always. I promise. It was a promise I didn't know if I could keep, but I would do anything to try. The weeks that followed were a nightmare in slow motion. Robert found a new job, but that didn't improve his behavior. It seemed that, having broken me, he no longer saw the need to pretend to change. The abuse returned, more calculated now. He was careful not to leave visible marks. He preferred methods that left no evidence, locking me in the basement for hours, hiding my food, waking me up several times during the night so I couldn't sleep properly. And worst of all, his advances toward Camila became more blatant. He insisted on bathing her, despite her being 12 years old. He bought inappropriate clothes and insisted she wear them. He entered her room without knocking. My mom, in her increasingly medicated state, seemed to live in another world. When I tried to confront her, she just murmured, Do what he wants, Gabriel. It's easier that way. But I couldn't. Not when it came to Camila. I started sleeping in the hallway, leaning against her door. Robert would trip over me during his nightly visits and kick me aside, but I always came back. It was a silent war between the two of us. One night, about 2 months after the shoebox incident, I woke to the sound of crying coming from Camila's room. I got up in panic, only to discover that the door was locked. From the inside. Camila, I called, knocking lightly. It's me, open up. The door opened a crack. She was in pajamas, hugging the teddy bear she'd had since she was little. Her eyes were red. What happened? I asked, entering and closing the door. He came here, she sobbed, said it was time for our special conversation. My heart raced. Did he hurt you? No, not like that. But he said things, Gabe, horrible things about what he's going to do to me when I'm ready. He said I'm his property, that he can do whatever he wants. The anger rose so intensely that I had to take several deep breaths not to scream. Where is he now? Taking a shower. Said he'll be back after. At that moment, I made a decision. It was no longer about escaping, surviving day to day. It was about ending this once and for all. Camilla, I want you to lock the door and not open it for anyone but me, understand? For no one. She nodded, eyes wide. What are you going to do? I kissed her forehead. What I should have done a long time ago. I left Camilla's room with a clarity I had never felt before. It was as if, after years of fog, I could finally see. The sound of the shower came from the bathroom at the end of the hall. Robert was there, probably preparing to return and terrorize my little sister. Something inside me had snapped. An invisible barrier that for years had contained my anger, my desperation, my survival instinct. I went down to the kitchen silently. Our apartment was small. From the kitchen, I could hear the shower running upstairs. In the sink was a large pot, the one my mom used to make soup on Sundays when she still had the energy to cook something beyond the basics. I grabbed it and put in water. I don't know exactly what I was planning at that moment. Part of me just wanted an instrument of defense, something to protect myself when I confronted Robert. But as I watched the water fill the pot, another part of me began to calculate, to plan. I turned the stove to maximum heat and put the pot on. I stood there watching the first bubbles form on the water's surface. It was hypnotizing. Each bubble that appeared was a moment in my life. Small explosions of pain, anger, and fear that I had repressed for so long. The shower was still running upstairs. I closed my eyes for a moment and saw all the times he had humiliated me, all the times he had made my mom cry, the look of terror in Camilla's eyes, what he was planning to do to her. The water began to boil furiously, just like my thoughts. Steam rose from the pot, fogging the kitchen cabinets. I turned off the heat. A decision had been made, not with words, but with something more primitive inside me. I took 2 dish towels to hold the pot handles. The weight of the boiling water was considerable, but at that moment I felt strong as I had never been allowed to be. I climbed the stairs slowly, careful not to spill. Each step seemed to take me not just to the upper floor, but to a point of no return in my life. The hallway was dark. The bathroom door, ajar, let out steam and light. I could hear Robert singing, humming some song while he bathed, completely unaware of what was about to happen. I paused for a second before the door. A distant voice in my head asked me, "Is this what you want to do? Are you sure?" But it was quickly silenced by the memory of Camilla's crying, his threats, the years of terror. I pushed the door with my foot. Robert had his back to me, naked under the shower, still humming. He didn't hear me come in because of the noise of the water. He didn't see me until it was too late. "Dad," I called. He turned, surprised. For an instant, our eyes met. I saw confusion in his gaze, then irritation for having invaded his space. He opened his mouth to reprimand me. That's when I advanced. I threw the entire contents of the pot directly at him, specifically aiming at his intimate parts. The water was boiling, close to 212 degrees Celsius. The scream that came out of him didn't seem human. It was something primitive, a sound I'll never forget. He fell to the shower floor, writhing, the skin instantly reddened and beginning to blister where the water had hit him. I stood there, holding the empty pot, watching. I felt no pleasure, no remorse, just relief, as if an enormous weight had been lifted from my shoulders. "Gabriel, what have you done?" My mom's voice came from behind me. I hadn't heard her arrive. She rushed past me, entered the shower, and turned off the water. Robert was still screaming, clutching the affected area. "Call an ambulance now," my mom shouted at me. I didn't move. "He was going to do something to Camilla," I said calmly. "He was going to hurt her." "My God, Gabriel." My mom looked at me as if she didn't recognize me. Maybe she really didn't. I was no longer the boy who cowered when his father raised his voice. Something fundamental had changed. It was my mom who called the ambulance. While we waited, I went to Camilla's room and knocked lightly. "It's me," I said. She opened the door, eyes wide with fear. "What happened? I heard screams." "Everything's okay now," I replied, surprisingly calm. "He won't hurt you anymore." The ambulance arrived in less than 15 minutes. The paramedics entered quickly, followed by police officers. Robert was rushed away, still screaming in pain. One of the officers, Officer Cardoso, according to his badge, separated me from the others. "What happened here, son?" I told him everything. Not just about that night, but about the years of abuse, about the bruises, the screaming, the constant terror, about how he had threatened Camila, how no one had helped us when we asked. The officer wrote everything down, his expression serious. "Why did you do this today? Why now?" "Because he was going to do something to my sister," I replied simply, "and no one else was going to protect us." I was taken to the police station. My mom and Camilla came too, but were kept in separate rooms. There were social workers, police officers, endless questions. The next morning, I learned that Robert was hospitalized with second and third-degree burns. The doctor said he would probably permanently lose sensitivity in the affected area. That's when the newspapers started. Teen scalds father during shower. Brutal revenge. Son throws boiling water on father. Photos of our house surrounded by police tape. Reporters interviewing neighbors who said what a normal family we were. No one mentioned the years of abuse. No one talked about what Robert had done or tried to do to Camilla. I was just the monster in the story, the troubled teenager who attacked the hardworking father. The legal process was quick and confusing. Being a minor, I was 17 when it happened. I wasn't tried as an adult. My mom, finally emerging from her stupor, confirmed part of the abuse, though not all of it. Camila, brave as always, told the social workers about Robert's night visits. There were medical examinations that confirmed my old injuries, scars that told their own story. Still, what I had done was serious. Aggravated assault with intent to cause permanent damage, they said. The judge, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, looked at me over his glasses during the hearing. "I understand the mitigating circumstances in this case," he said, "but I cannot ignore the brutality of the act. There are other ways to deal with abuse situations." I almost laughed. Other ways? Like the ones we had tried for years without result? "Considering your age and the circumstances, you will serve a 3-year sentence in juvenile detention with semi-annual evaluations. 3 years in the rehabilitation center for minors. It could have been worse. If I were a few months older, it would have been real prison." My mom was crying silently at the back of the room. Camilla was with social workers. Being a minor, she couldn't attend the hearing. Before being taken away, I asked, "And my sister? What will happen to her?" "Your mother obtained a protective order against your father," the judge replied. "He will not be able to approach any of you when you are released." It was something, at least. In the rehabilitation center, the first days were the worst. Other inmates heard about my case. It was impossible not to hear with all the media coverage. Some taunted me, calling me the shower psycho. Others kept their distance, as if I might attack them at any moment. There was a counselor there, Dr. Sergio, who tried to help me. "You need to process what happened, Gabriel, all the anger, all the fear." But I couldn't talk about it. Not completely. How to explain that? Despite the horror of what I had done, part of me didn't regret it. How to admit that in my darkest moments I wished I had done something worse? The months dragged on. There were classes, group therapy, work in the center's garden. My mom would visit me twice a month, always with news of Camilla. They had moved to another neighborhood. My mom had found a job as a supermarket cashier. Camilla was adapting to her new school. Robert survived. Of course. According to what my mom told me in whispers, he underwent several surgeries, but the damage was permanent, complete impotence. A poetic justice I hadn't planned, but that seemed appropriate. He tried to violate the protective order once, showing up drunk at their new house. He was jailed for a few days and then released. After that, he apparently gave up. In my second year at the center, I began to change. The constant anger that had been my companion for so long started to diminish. It didn't disappear, I don't think it ever will completely, but it became something I could control instead of being controlled by it. I started talking in therapy sessions, not about that specific night, but about the years before, about what it was like to live in constant fear, about how I tried to protect my sister, about how I felt invisible to the world. "What do you expect when you get out of here?" Dr. Sergio asked me one day. I thought for a moment. "I want Camilla to grow up without fear. I want her to know she's safe. And you? What do you want for yourself?" That was a harder question. I don't know, peace, maybe. A life where I don't have to look over my shoulder all the time." He nodded as if the answer made sense. "You know you'll eventually have to forgive, don't you?" "Forgive? Robert?" I asked incredulously. "Not necessarily. Maybe your mother for not protecting you better. Maybe the system that failed you. Maybe yourself for what you did." I didn't answer. Forgiveness seemed too distant a concept for me to grasp. In my last year at the center, I received a letter from Camilla. She had never written to me before. Visits were only with my mom. The letter was short, but it made me cry for the first time since I entered there. "Dear Gabe, I know what you did was because of me. I want you to know that I'm okay now. I don't have nightmares anymore. I'm not afraid to walk around the house. Mom is better too. She stopped taking the medication. Sometimes she even laughs. You're my hero, even if no one else sees it. Love you forever, Camilla." I kept that letter like a talisman. On the toughest nights, when I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake, I would reread her words. Finally, after exactly 3 years, I was released. I was 20 and looked much older. My mom was waiting at the exit alone. Camilla was at school. "Gabriel," she said, hugging me hesitantly. She was different, thinner, with shorter hair, less hunched over. Her eyes were clear without the hazy look from the medication. In the car, she told me she had joined a support group for women victims of domestic violence, that she was in therapy, that she had realized too late how she had failed me. "Forgive me, son," she asked at a stoplight, eyes fixed on the road ahead. I looked at her. This woman who for so long had been both victim and accomplice, who didn't protect me, but who also didn't know how to protect herself. "I'm trying," I answered honestly. Our new home was small but clean, in a quiet neighborhood. Camilla had her own room decorated with posters of bands I didn't know. She was taller, less childlike. She was 15 now. When she saw me, she ran and jumped into my arms like she did when she was little. "You're back?" "I'm back," I confirmed, holding her tight, "and I'm never leaving again." Readjustment was difficult. There were looks on the streets. Some people recognized me from the newspapers. Whispers when I passed by. "It's him, the boy who threw boiling water on his father." Finding work was almost impossible with my record. Eventually, I got a job at a small auto repair shop on the outskirts of town. The owner, Mr. A. Joe, didn't care about my past as long as I worked hard, and I did, every day. I arrived early and left late. I learned everything I could about engines, transmissions, electrical systems. The manual labor calmed me, gave me purpose. At night, I studied to finish the high school education I had interrupted when I went to the center. Camilla often studied with me, helping me with subjects that had changed in the last few years. Slowly, we built a new routine, a new life. My mom worked during the day and took a technical course at night. Camilla was doing well in school, had friends, laughed more. We never saw Robert again. I heard rumors he had moved to another state, that he drank more than ever, that sometimes he talked about the ungrateful son who had ruined his life. Sometimes in my darkest moments, I wonder if he knows that in truth, it was he who created the monster that destroyed him, that each blow, each humiliation, each threat was an ingredient in the recipe of his own downfall, that in trying to break me, he only transformed me into something that could break him. The juvenile rehabilitation center wasn't like the prisons you see in movies. There weren't violent gangs or brutal guards. It was more like a very strict boarding school, with rigid rules and consequences for every infraction. During my time there, I shared a room with 3 other guys. Carlos had stabbed his stepfather who abused his mother. Renato had problems with drugs and was caught in a robbery. Diego ran someone over while driving drunk. We all had stories, we all had reasons, we all had regrets, or at least most of us did. Days followed a strict routine. Wake up at 6 a.m., Make the bed perfectly or lose points. Breakfast at 7, classes from 8 to noon, lunch, work in the garden or workshops during the afternoon, individual or group therapy 3 times a week, dinner at 6 p.m., supervised free time until 8 p.m., lights out at 10 p.m. The monotony was suffocating at times, but there was also something comforting in the predictability. For the first time in my life, I knew exactly what to expect from each day. There were no violent surprises, no constant tension waiting for someone to explode. The worst were the nightmares. Almost every night I woke up sweating, vivid images of the bathroom, the steam, the screams. Sometimes in the dream, I was the one under the boiling water. Other times it was Camilla or my mom. I would wake up breathless, heart beating like a drum in my chest. Dr. Sergio said it was normal, that it was my brain trying to process the trauma. You lived for years in a constant state of alert, Gabriel. Your nervous system is dysregulated. It takes time to heal. Time was the only thing I had plenty of there. In therapy sessions, we talked about anger management, about trauma, about forgiveness. I learned techniques to calm my mind when thoughts began to race. I learned to identify triggers that took me back to moments of panic. You are not your anger, Dr. Sergio often told me. You are not what they did to you. You are the choices you make from now on. In my second year, I began tutoring other inmates in math. I had always been good with numbers, even when my grades dropped because of the situation at home. Teaching gave me purpose, made me feel I could contribute something beyond destruction. That's also when I started writing. Nothing elaborate, just thoughts in a notebook Dr. Sergio gave me. At first, it was difficult. The words wouldn't come, or they came in explosions of anger that covered pages with large, angular letters. Over time, I learned to organize my thoughts, to reflect instead of just reacting. I wrote about my childhood, about the rare moments of happiness before everything collapsed. I wrote about Camila, about how her smile was the only light in dark days. I wrote about my mom, my conflicting feelings of love and resentment. And yes, I wrote about Robert, not as the monster of my nightmares, but as a broken man who broke others around him. I tried to understand how someone becomes like that. If he too had been abused as a child, if he really believed what he did was normal, or if he knew it was wrong but couldn't stop. I found no answers. Of course, there are no simple explanations for the evil people do to each other, but the process of questioning helped me see beyond the blind rage that had consumed me for so long. During visits, my mom brought news from the outside world. Camilla was recovering well, also in therapy. Robert had tried to contest the restraining order once but gave up when they threatened to arrest him. Eventually, he moved away, disappeared from our lives except as a shadow in the corners of our memory. "Do you think he'll ever come back?" I asked my mom once. She shook her head. "No, the shame is too great. Everyone knows what happened. And she hesitated. He's not the same man physically anymore." I didn't ask for details. I didn't want to know. In my last year at the center, I began to think about the future. What would I do when I got out? Who would I be beyond the boiling water boy? Dr. Sergio helped me make concrete plans, finish school, maybe take a technical course, find stable work. "You're intelligent, Gabriel," he would say. "You have potential. Don't let one moment of losing control define your entire life." It was hard to believe him sometimes. Hard to imagine a normal life after everything. But I tried. For Camilla, for my mom, for myself. When I finally left, 3 years after that fateful night, the world seemed simultaneously familiar and strange. The colors were more vivid, the sounds louder. There was a dizzying freedom in being able to walk wherever I wanted, eat what I wanted, sleep when I wanted. Our new life is modest but peaceful. I started working at the repair shop during the day and studying at night. My mom works double shifts to pay the bills, but she seems lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Camilla is flourishing in adolescence, becoming more and more like the cheerful girl she had been before everything darkened. Little by little, we're beginning to heal the invisible wounds that Robert left on us. Never completely, some scars are permanent, but maybe enough to function, to find small joys in everyday life, to look to the future with something beyond fear. I never spoke publicly about what happened. When people asked, especially at work or at night school, I would say vaguely that I had family problems or spent time institutionalized as a teenager. Most didn't insist. Those who knew usually kept their distance, as if violence were contagious. Sometimes, on the quietest night sitting in this empty park, I wonder if I did the right thing that night. Not in the moral sense. I know what I did was extreme, brutal, unforgivable in many ways. But I wonder if there was another way out that I couldn't see at the time. If we had run away that same night, if I had taken Camilla far away, if I had reported Robert one more time, would it have worked? Or would he have found us, punished us even more severely for trying to escape? There's no way to know now. What's done is done. I live with the consequences every day, with the looks, the whispers, the permanent stain on my name, with the nightmares that still come, less frequently, but still vivid. But I also live with the certainty that Camilla is safe, that my mom finally found her voice, that the cycle of abuse that could have continued for generations was broken, even if in a violent way. I don't consider myself a hero, nor an innocent victim. I'm someone who was pushed beyond the limit and reacted in the only way I could imagine at that desperate moment. Someone who will forever carry the weight of that decision, but who also knows the relief that came afterward. If I could go back in time, would I do it differently? Honestly, I don't know. When I think of the alternatives, Camilla suffering what I suffered, or worse, my mom sinking deeper into depression and medication, Robert continuing his reign of terror with impunity, I can't imagine a happy ending that didn't involve some kind of catastrophic rupture. Maybe that's the real tragedy in stories like mine. Sometimes there are no clean exits, no perfect solutions. Sometimes we're just choosing between different types of scars. Today, fresh out of the rehabilitation center 3 years after that night, I feel I'm finally beginning to build something that looks like a life. It's not the life I imagined as a child, full of bright possibilities. It's more contained, more cautious, but it's mine. Camilla is adapting well to high school. She's already talking about going to college in the future, maybe psychology. I want to help other kids like us, Gabe, she told me recently. I want them to know they're not alone. My mom smiles more frequently now. Sometimes she even sings in the kitchen like she did when I was very little. She never got romantically involved with anyone else. I think I've had enough experiences with men for a lifetime, she jokes. But I see the truth behind the humor. As for me, I'm still trying to figure out who I am beyond my story, beyond the frightened boy, beyond the vengeful teenager. I'm trying to build an identity that isn't defined only by trauma or violence. It's not easy. There are days when the anger still burns, when the flashbacks are so vivid I need to sit down and breathe deeply until they pass. Days when I look in the mirror and see Robert's reflection looking back at me, and the fear of becoming like him is so strong I can barely breathe. But there are also good days. Days when I fix a particularly complicated engine and feel genuine pride. Days when I help Camilla with a problem and see confidence in her eyes, not fear. Days when my mom and I manage to have an honest conversation about the past without either of us falling apart. Small steps towards something that feels like healing, or at least scarring over. If you've made it this far and really care about my story, I need you to do something for me now. Like this video, subscribe to the Traumatic Accounts channel, hit that notification bell, and comment what time it is where you are while you're watching this. It seems like a strange request, but I want to know at what moment in your day you dedicated time to listen to a story like mine. Whether it was in the middle of the night, when demons also keep you awake, or during the day between normal commitments. I want to know if stories like mine reach real people in real moments of their lives. I'm not here asking for absolution, nor trying to justify what I did. I'm just sharing a truth that rarely appears in sensationalist headlines. That sometimes the lines between victim and perpetrator, between right and wrong, between justice and revenge, are so thin we can barely see them until we've already crossed them. If you're living your own silent hell, if you know someone who is, I hope this story serves as a warning. Seek help before it's too late. Before the only way out seems to be something you can't undo. And if you, like so many, just pass by here out of morbid curiosity, I hope I've at least left you something to think about what happens in the houses you pass every day, about the smiles that hide screams, about how sometimes the monsters in the headlines were created by much scarier monsters who never appeared in any newspaper. It's getting dark here in the park. Soon I'll have to go back home where Camilla is probably studying at the kitchen table, where my mom must be preparing dinner. A house where, for the first time in our lives, we don't have to walk on tiptoes, we don't have to measure every word, we don't have to fear the sound of a key turning in the lock. Was it worth it? I can't say. I don't know if I'll ever know. I just know that we're alive. We're together, and for the first time in a long time, we're not just surviving, we're beginning to live.